very special word of welcome, everybody in Kernersville, brothers and sisters in Clemens, and hey, all you guys in King. So good to be with you, and a special word of welcome to everybody joining us online. Are you ready for some good news? If you're tired, like most of the world in this crazy, busy country of ours, I mean, if you're restless, if you are overwrought or stressed, if you're anxious about the uncertainties of life, if that's you, like most of us, Jesus has an invitation. Come to me, and I will give you rest. In 2011, there was a postal worker in Durham, North Carolina, who was caught on camera dumping 7 bags of mail into the woods. I guess he just got too busy and stressed out, so he just went to the forest and just delivered the mail to the squirrels and the bunny rabbits, and he got caught on camera. The part that made me laugh while I was reading the article, though, was that it said postal authorities have noted that only 2 or 3 people have complained of missing the mail. Well, yeah, nobody wants any more mail. One less bill, nobody's going to complain. We're all way too busy. If you talk to somebody and say, how you been? What's going on? The usual answer is, well, good, but I've been real busy. Nobody says, well, I've been real rested and I'm real content with things in my life right now. I talked to my buddy last week who had gallbladder surgery. I was praying for him, and it went great, the robotic and laparoscopic procedure. I checked in with him on the day off. I said, how did it go? He said, it's gone great. I said, how you feeling? He said, so far I feel good. I checked in the next day, and so we want to get a meal to you. And how's the pain? Manager said, pain's going great. He said, my wife's taking good care of me. He said, a few days off work. He said, how's your week going? I said, really stressful. He said, well, maybe what you need is a little gallbladder surgery. For just a second, I thought, a few days off, people taking care of me. I was like, what is wrong with me? You might be too busy and stressed if the idea of a little outpatient surgery might sound kind of nice. We're so restless. We're so overwrought. We're so stressed. And then comes this beautiful invitation. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Come to me. What an invitation. And that invitation is really what we're exploring for the remainder of this year. An invitation to structure your life, to build space and time in such a way that you can accept regularly, daily, Jesus' invitation, come to me and find rest for your souls. I love Gene Peterson's rendering of this in the Message. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Oh, don't you want that? Who doesn't want that? So we need to glean the treasure out of these words from Jesus, and to do so, we're going to need to first face the problem of this overstressed society of ours and what's going on with that and why it seems to be getting worse. And then the text is going to lead us into an intriguing puzzle. It's a puzzle because, I'll say this up front, if Jesus wants to choose an image, as he usually does, to help teach, and in this case he wants to show us how to find rest in him, why does he use the image of a yoke, which is an image of work, in fact, of beasts of burden? That's a puzzle. We're going to learn about that. And then to really get the treasure from these verses, we're going to have to take him up on a privilege. And the privilege of this is a glimpse into the heart of the Messiah. For this is the only place in the New Testament where Jesus says explicitly, this is what my heart looks like. It's gentle and lowly. And in understanding that and connecting to that heart, you're going to find rest. First, though, the problem of such a stressed out society. Everybody says, I feel too busy. I even talk to retired people and they say, I thought when I retire, I'd have all this time on my hands. I feel busier than I ever did. Most American sociologists, before the big technological boom of the 1950s, predicted that we were going to have a crisis of too much leisure. They said all these inventions are going to give everybody so much time they'll have nothing to do. Nobody's ever missed a prediction worse than that. You can see how they thought that, because if it takes an hour to hand wash all the dishes, but then you get a dishwasher and it takes 15 minutes to load it, they said you just saved 45 minutes. And same thing with a washing machine and so forth. And so they said all these free hours are going to come in your day and we're going to be bored. That's going to be the big problem. And of course, they were right. The technology made us more efficient, but it made us oddly busier because it gave us more choices. I was thinking, like, in college, before we really had computers and definitely before we had internet, I did a lot of research papers. And the way I knew when my research was done was when I'd looked at all the material we had in our library at Carolina. And sometimes it was a lot. But once I'd been thorough and I'd checked out all the books I knew to check out on it and read, I'd done my research. Now, all that research is available with a click of a button. But not just that, but the whole world of research. So it's way more efficient and faster to do the same amount of research, but what's missing is a limit on it. And so there's no stopping it. There's no limit to it. You can just keep on going. This is what's happened to us. And something happened in our country, in America. Now, I don't know exactly what it is. I've read some of the theories, but we had a change of our consciousness and the way we think about leisure and work. In 1899, there was an economist who wrote a book about the theory of the leisure class, this book by a man named Veblen. And he talked about how the conspicuous abstention from labor, he called it, was a mark of affluence. Because the time was in which, even in our own country, that if you had a lot of time on your hands, everybody assumed, well, you're really rich. But now, people that are richer are usually busier than those that are poorer than them. It's odd. It's very different from lots of countries around the world, like in Europe, places like Italy, where it's mandated. Every employer gives every employee at least 4 weeks of paid vacation and all their holidays, and sometimes a lot more. And half the people are taking off the whole month of July. And the researchers showed a group of Italians and Americans similar vignettes that depicted a person that was very busy and working all the time, and then depicted another person who seemed to have lots of leisure, and asked them what they thought of it. It was so interesting. The Italians assumed that the person who wasn't working that much and had a lot of leisure, they said, he must be very wealthy. And this person over here who was working all the time said, he must not have much and he's having to always work to try to catch up. But Americans, when they saw it, were just the opposite. They assumed that the person who wasn't working much was maybe lazy and probably was poor because of as a result of that. So we've come into a culture that for whatever reason we got here, America now applauds drivenness and commends the kind of frenzied pace that makes us so stressful. It's like it's a badge of honor for us. It's like it's embarrassing if you don't tell somebody that you're really, really busy. So American culture, here's the problem, is commending a stressed out lifestyle. And it's killing us, literally. Stress without real rest, studies show, makes us more sick, makes us more isolated, and there is, according to scholarly research, something like an epidemic of anxiety and depression in our young generation. So we really need these words of Jesus, don't we? Because it's a big problem. But when you get into this text, there's a puzzle that's here. Why use this image of a yoke? In the definitive passage where Jesus more clearly than any other place says, I want to give you rest, the image that he uses here is not of a hammock for taking a nap, not of a blanket on a grassy hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. You'd think he would be giving us some picture of leisure, but instead he uses the image of a yoke. A yoke was made out of wood and had these hooks that would go around the beasts of burden and would link them together like oxen so that they could pull a plow. So you think about this, a yoke is about being linked, okay? You're absolutely connected, these two or more animals. It's about direction. It's about you got to be going in the same direction with the one you're yoked with. It's about therefore sharing, not just coexisting, but actually sharing up under something. And the yoke is ultimately an agrarian image, a farming image about making a field more fruitful. Now that gives you a little entrance into this puzzle of why the yoke image, because Jesus is giving an invitation here to a shared life. He's given an invitation to say, be yoked with me and share the same direction of life with me. He's given an invitation that says we are up under in the same way, a same kind of purpose, and ultimately this will make you more fruitful than you ever could have been. So that's part of it. But still, couldn't he have used some other image that would make you think of the leisurely life? Well, he could have, but it would have been a false image. Because the invitation to discipleship, according to Jesus, is not a life of ease. In fact, he said, in this world you'll have trouble. Elsewhere, he said, if you follow me, you'll probably be persecuted. So Jesus is the truth, and he's not going to give an image that's not really true about real life. He's saying something different here. He's saying, I am inviting you into a life of work and productivity, but it's going to be work that's in a completely different way. Come to me, you who labor and are heavy laden. Come, but it doesn't say there's no more work. He says take on a different kind of yoke. Have you ever noticed there was work in the Garden of Eden before there was sin? Yeah, there was work in paradise. Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. There's vocation, tending, cultivating, working it. And this is not arbitrary or meaningless. It has a purpose. He has a calling. He's got a reason for being. And so it's a profound act of trust. Almighty God is partnering with this creature that he's made in his own image and gives him a job to do. But then once sin enters the world, this whole idea of work comes right back up. Now that shame and curse have entered the world, God has this to say in Genesis 3:17 to Adam, cursed is the ground because of you, in pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Pain is somehow introduced to this. And thorns and thistles it brings. So all these frustrations that come with it. And he says, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. So what was once joy now feels like drudgery. What once felt balanced and fun now feels like a heavy weight. The kind of thing that makes you dread Monday and you can't wait till Friday. What happened? What happened when paradise was lost? What happened to work? I think of Jesus who said, if you want to have more of heaven, here's a good picture. And he brought a little toddler up. He said, be more like this. Have you ever noticed that little children just love and long to do the chores and jobs that we hate to do? On a hot afternoon many years ago, Ann and I were babysitting for our 3-year-old nephew, Jake, and his 1-year-old sister. And we had great plans for the afternoon, and we had Winnie the Pooh videos and games to play, and we wanted to have a wonderful time while Catherine and Kevin went out for a nice date. Love to turn the children back over to them fresh and happy, and they've had a good time. And all was going well until I realized that a storm was coming, and I hadn't mowed the lawn, and it was time to do it. And so I said, honey, if you could just play with the kids for a while, I hate to do it, but I got to go out here and mow the lawn. She said, okay, go ahead and do it. So I go out for one of my least favorite chores of all. And it's a hot July afternoon, humidity 90%. You're sweating just getting the lawnmower out. I make a couple of passes and I'm like, how soon can I get done with this dreaded chore? And I look over and there's 3-year-old Jake standing on the sidewalk and he's kind of waving at me with longing in his eyes. And I stopped, turned off the mower, and I said, what is it, Jake? He said, I want to help you, Uncle Alan. I'm like, well, okay. And I went and got him a little broom. And I said, here, you can sweep off the sidewalk. And I went back and I started mowing again, made a couple of passes across the yard. And I looked, and there he was just sobbing his eyes out. I turned the mower off again. I went over to him, I crouched, and I said, what is it, Jake? And he just brokenheartedly said, I just want to help you mow the lawn, Uncle Alan. I just want to help you mow the lawn, please. And I wanted to say, son, what is wrong with this picture? Do you not realize it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity and the grass is up to my shins and the yellow jackets are nipping at my heels and the sweat's running down my face? Inside we've got Winnie the Pooh. Inside we've got games. In the backyard we have a swing set and a slide. This, my child, is work. We hate work. We want to play. We get our work done so we can play. But a little child doesn't understand the difference. Grandbaby Mia loves her toy kitchen. She loves a toy vacuum cleaner, and she delights to take an antiseptic wipe and wipe off the table. What happened on the pathway to adulthood? It's something like what happened to Adam in that garden. What once felt like a gift now felt like a curse. And what once felt delightful now felt heavy. And it's into this that Jesus gives the invitation, take up my yoke, a different kind of work. And look at this. Here's part of the key to understand it, and learn from me. This word for learn here in Greek, mathano, if it becomes a noun, it becomes the word mathetes, and that's the word in the New Testament for disciple. A disciple is a learner. Come and learn. In Jewish families in ancient times, children would start school at around age 6 in what was called Bet Sefer. And this was an opportunity, it means house of the book, and it was their opportunity to begin to learn the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And they would seek to memorize all 5 books of the Old Testament. And then, and as they began, this was a beautiful picture, as they began learning, a rabbi would come over and cover their slate, their learning board, their little chalkboard or whatever, and cover it with honey. And then he'd tell, can you imagine a bunch of 6-year-olds in a classroom? And he'd tell the 6-year-olds, go ahead, you can lick that honey, lick it off of there. And so, bunch of 6-year-olds getting away with licking up all this sugary goodness. And then he said to them, as we begin studies, it is my prayer that you will learn to love the Word of God more than honey, for it is sweeter than honey, even the honeycomb. And they would learn the Word. And then following this, students could continue at age 10 to 14 in what was called Bet Talmud. And this is the house of learning. Not just memorizing, but asking questions and learning how to think and do philosophy and ideologies and understanding. And of those students, the ones who excelled the most, some of them, most of them would go back and start practicing a trade and become a carpenter or a plumber or whatever they're going to become. But some of the best students would be given an opportunity to enter into what was known as Bet Midrash. And this was an opportunity to follow a rabbi. If a rabbi saw enough promise in you, then you could come into a following of that rabbi. And there was a saying, may you be covered with the dust of your rabbi, meaning that you're so close that you're learning a whole new way of life. So you can think of it being like an apprentice for a plumber or an intern for a highly regarded professor. Or maybe you are a resident or a fellow in a orthopedic surgery practice, and you get to come close to an orthopedist who has developed a highly skilled posterior approach to hip replacement surgery and teaches you the way that she does that surgery. So you learn it in its nuances by being with, you see. So it's like being an apprentice. But a particular rabbi had something to offer that was what they considered far more important than merely a skill set. And that was a way of interpreting scriptures, and therefore a way of living, a whole way of life, a school of thought, a biblical philosophy. And that way of living and that way of the rabbi was called his yoke. So to take up the yoke of a rabbi was to come by invitation into a close, inseparable fellowship and apprenticeship with that rabbi so you could learn his way of being and thinking. Now the puzzle gets clearer, doesn't it? When Jesus said, "Come to me and take up my yoke," he is the greatest, most wonderful rabbi ever in the history of the world, the greatest teacher. When he says, "Take up my yoke," he's saying, come and take upon yourselves this extraordinary gift of being with me, connecting with me, and learning from me. This goes far to explain why those early disciples were so quick to drop their fishing nets and follow this rabbi, because they weren't the ones who'd been the stellar academic students who had gone on to be able to follow some famous rabbi. And now the most popular rabbi anyone ever heard of had come to them and said, "Would you like to come under my yoke? Would you like to come and apprentice with me and learn everything I have to share?" And they were saying, "Yes, of course." It'd been like our son Bennett when he was playing junior golf. If Tiger Woods had come to him and said, "Would you like a year's worth of free lessons where I'm with you every day and I teach you everything I know?" Of course I want that. We're talking here about the creator of the cosmos, of a maker of 100 trillion billion stars, the inventor of the human genome, the source of life and all wisdom, who says, "Come and be with me and learn from me, and I'll show you it all." That's the invitation to take up the yoke. The greatest rabbi ever offering the greatest privilege ever. And that's what it is. It's a privilege. There's a problem. We're overstressed. It's a puzzle. Why a yoke? Maybe you're seeing that now. So dig into this and embrace it for all it's worth. This is the greatest privilege imaginable. When you think about structuring your life to make space and time to be with this Messiah, is the greatest privilege imaginable. It means that this is from Jesus and it is a gift. Look at this again. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This is a gift from Jesus. Taking his yoke is his gift to you. Prince of Preachers Charles Spurgeon said, "Remember, therefore, it is not thy hold of Christ that saves thee, it is Christ. It is not thy joy in Christ that saves thee, it is Christ. It is not even faith in Christ, though that be the instrument, it is Christ's blood and merits. Therefore look not so much to thy hand with which thou art grasping Christ as to Christ. Look not to thy hope, but to Jesus, the source of thy hope. Look not to thy faith, but to Jesus, the author and finisher of thy faith. We shall never find happiness by looking at our prayers, our doings, or our feelings. It is what Jesus is, not what we are, that gives rest to the soul. This is the gift. Jesus himself, the rabbi. this beautiful privilege, this extraordinary invitation. It's not like receiving a book or a list of principles or a religion. It is the gift of a person. Take my yoke upon you, he says, and learn from me. Learn it all from me. The gift from Jesus is all of who he is. So you learn from him. It's an invitation to a whole way of being. And that's powerful and freeing and wondrous. Because don't you want to be like Jesus? Especially when you think about how weary we are, and then you look at the life of Jesus and realize he didn't live like that. John Mark Comer was an overly busy pastor, preaching 6 times each Sunday and getting worn out in his whole life. And he wrote a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. In it, he asked, can you imagine a stressed out Jesus snapping at Mary Magdalene after a long day? I can't believe you dropped the hummus. Or sighing and saying to himself, I seriously need a glass of wine. Can you picture him half talking to you and half texting on his iPhone, the sporadic punctuating a one-sided conversation? Can you hear him saying, I'm sorry, I'd love to heal your leg, but I got a plane to catch? All that's comical because we can't even envision Jesus like that, because somehow he was incredibly powerful and productive and yet utterly at peace and working from rest. John Mark Comer again, this rootedness in the moment and connectedness to God, other people, and himself weren't the byproducts of a laid-back personality or a pre-Wi-Fi world. They were the outgrowths of a way of life, a whole new way to be human that Jesus put on display in story after story, a whole new way to be human. So go deeper into the beauty and the power of this offer, of this whole new way to be human. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. Why? Because I'm gentle and lowly in heart. His invitation to be his apprentice, his student, his follower, is not about a skill set. It is not so much just about learning how to do a procedure. It is a glimpse, a welcoming into his heart. What he most wants to give to you is his heart. Again, the only place in the New Testament where Jesus explicitly tells us what his heart is like, and he says it's gentle and lowly. Gentle, the word translated here, occurs only 3 other times in the New Testament. It occurs in Matthew 5:5, where we read about the meek will inherit the earth, gentle. It's also used in prophecy of Matthew 21 that Jesus is coming to you humble on a donkey, gentle. The word lowly overlaps with this. It generally is translated also humble, as in James 4, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. It is essentially saying Jesus, though God, is utterly accessible. The heart of Jesus is that he wants to be available, up close. He won't use his divinity to turn away your humanity. He won't use his righteousness to look down upon your unrighteousness. He loves giving you rest from your burdens. He loves that. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden's light. This word for easy can mean pleasant or kind. He said, my yoke is kind. Beautiful words from Dane Ortland, who writes, his yoke is kind, his burden is light. That is, his yoke is a non-yoke, and his burden is a non-burden. What helium does to a balloon, Jesus' yoke does to his followers. We are buoyed along in life by his endless gentleness and supremely accessible lowliness. This is because the heart of God, the heart of Jesus himself, is so full of longing to share his life with you that the deepest motivational part of him, his heart, can be described as gentle, kind, and lowly, light. See, in our human flesh, we tend to assume that if we share a burden with somebody, that we have burdened them. That I've got this hard thing and now I tell it to you, and we stop and we say, I'm sorry to burden you with this. Because in our flesh, we kind of like feel like we're carrying around a certain amount and somebody else gives us something and now we got more and we got even more and even more. Right? But what Jesus is saying is something totally different than that. He's saying he is not diminished when we unburden ourselves with him. He is delighted. Dane Ortland says, it's like a missionary doctor, perhaps, who's gone on a mission trip to a remote jungle where he is trying to help a primitive tribe of people who've never seen traditional medicine, and because of their superstitions, they won't accept his work. Until one day, a tribal leader who is sick with a fever decides to give it a try and take an antibiotic. And what does that doctor feel when finally there's a patient who's willing to receive his treatment? Burdened by that? No, joy. Like a lifeguard who is trained to be able to save someone, and one day there is a person crying, help, help, who is drowning, and the lifeguard swims to them with the life-preserving devices and is able to rescue her and bring her to safety. And you go, well, how do you feel about that, lifeguard? Is the lifeguard going to say, well, that's a bummer, I feel all drained by that? No, because the heart wants to save. See, when Jesus says, this is my heart, he's talking about his nature. He's like that. He is a burden bearer because he wants to be. So, big problem. We're so overstressed. We all feel it. Big puzzle. Why a yoke? I think we've seen into that. And then this glorious privilege that we get to be connected to the heart of God, which is an invitation to a Sabbath-like way of living. This is really part one. Part two comes next week. We'll talk more practically about how to put this into practice. But it is, simply put, an invitation to live your life with the yoke of Jesus, meaning a whole different way of being human that is empowered by him and with him inseparably connected to the heart of Jesus. Wow. Most mornings while I eat my breakfast, I do the jumble in the paper, unscrambling 4 words, using certain letters from those words to then solve a riddle. And I don't do it because I want to keep my brain sharp. And I don't do it because somebody told me I ought to do it. I do it because I kind of like doing the jumble. and so I do it most days. And I like it. But if you told me, Alan, tomorrow you got to show up at 8 a.m. to such and such classroom, and you're going to have an exam, and there are going to be 20 jumbles, and you're going to be given a limited period of time to do the jumbles, and you must be able to pass this exam, or else you're going to have to go to jumble solving school for 6 months. And if you don't perform well, the teacher's going to wrap your knuckles with a ruler every time you miss a jumble. And somebody's going to be breathing over your neck saying, go faster, go faster. That wouldn't be fun. The jumble's like play to me. But if you put that into it, it becomes work. What happened? Once it became law, it introduced fear, didn't it? And all you got to do to take something that's a delight and make it drudgery is to put fear into it. So the invitation of Jesus is an invitation to live a life that is the fear taken out of it. Because what are we afraid of? And why are we so driven? Because we're afraid we're not going to be enough. We're not going to accomplish enough. We're not going to be loved enough. We might be rejected. Whatever it might be. And Jesus comes to us and gives us this invitation and says, come and live under this yoke with me, and I will give you rest. How? Jesus has already done the sweating. He sweat blood at Gethsemane. And it was his brow that was pierced with thorns on the cross. And he did the work. It was the hardest work that any human could ever conceive of doing, and that is bearing the sin of the world. And he said, Tetelestai, it is finished. He announced he had done the work. And on the third day, he marched right out of the grave and ascended to the right hand of the Father. And he reigns in glory and praise for you and says, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, all you who feel burdened, and take on my yoke because it's kind. It's not like the heavy yoke of those Pharisees and the other rabbis. This is an easy yoke because I've already finished the work on your behalf. And when you get a life that's connected up to me, one that is connected with my finished work and my empowering spirit, then you will have discovered a whole new way of being a human. So if you are tired, hear him say it very personally to you. Come to me. Come daily. Come now to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, for I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, my way of being. For I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and my yoke is kind and easy, and you will find rest for your souls. And that's the gospel.